Hey there, welcome to today's episode. We're going to be doing a live unedited session, and I want to look at Soulfi from Teletone Audio. This thing popped up in my email inbox because I'm on Teletone's mailing list, mainly because I bought Vespertone in the past. That is a really great plugin as well. It's got a really nice Rhodes piano, and what Teletone seems to do is they take these really beautiful instruments, they sample them really well, multi-sample them, tweak them sometimes like they've done with this drum kit. They use towels on some of the snares and stuff, really made it their own. They process it using some analog gears so they're really nice and warm and just feel right. Package them up into these plugins and then give you all of these kind of sound design options. And with this Soulfi drums, we also get a beat maker. We get a step sequencer, if you like, so that we can kind of make our own fake drum breaks. Now, being a hip hop guy and constantly on the hunt through old records for drum breaks, or sample packs and things like that, I've always wanted a plugin that would kind of act like this, and currently I don't own a decent multi-sample drum plugin. I've got a couple of multi-sample kits from Native Instruments and Ableton themselves, but nothing that acts like this thing. I was very impressed with it as soon as I plugged it in. So I want to just dive in and show you this as best as I can. We are using Ableton, but of course it is a plugin, so it will work with any DAW. We have our home page here, and the first thing I should mention is that it is a Kontakt-based instrument. However, you don't need the full version of Kontakt, you only need the free Kontakt 7 player, which is what this is currently running through. Nice clean interface, it feels warm, feels kind of vintagey, but they've not gone over the top and tried to make it look like old equipment, still nice and simple. We've got a little play button in the top. I just wanted to mention that first because when I first turned this thing on, I didn't notice it was tucked up here, me being a little bit blind, of course, but it is, yeah, it's up in the top right corner next to the settings button. That comes in handy when you want to start playing your patterns and things later on. The title, of course, a couple of pages. We're going to start with the home page. This top section is what I call the sound design section, it's what they've also called it, but this works on like a global level. So if you make a pattern up inside of the beat maker using one of the kits, when you apply some of these effects, and there's things that you can do in real time with the pitch and mod wheel, which we'll come back to, that is affecting everything on a kind of global level. In the middle here, we have the kit selection. Currently, this is just as it boots up, so it's using 03 little knock kit, and we'll audition some of those for you a little bit later on as well, but that's how you load up your drum kits. There are 41 drum kits to choose from, and the first thing I want to clear up is no, you can't load in your own sounds. I know that's going to be one of the first questions people ask me. However, I don't think you should. I think the reason this is such a nice plugin is because it's been very carefully curated for the correct sound, the correct feel. They did release an expansion, I think, for one of their other drum plugins. I'm not sure if we will see that. I can't speak for them, but maybe in the future we'll see more kits added. However, the 41 are still pretty impressive as it is already, so you're not going to run out of sound too quickly. And also because there's a lot of sound design and you can pick and choose between sounds and make your own custom kits, you're going to be just fine. Beat selection is the patterns. There are pre-made patterns that go into the step sequencer, and we'll take a look at those in greater detail later as well. And then underneath we have our drum detail section, where essentially you are tweaking each individual sound. I just want to drop to the bottom as well and talk about a couple of things here. With the red keys, you are playing manually, so you're playing the individual sounds, and we can listen to some of those. Nice little drum roll and everything in there. Those sounds sound really good. We've got the manual option, and then also you have the blue keys, which will trigger the patterns from the beat maker. So once you've made your own patterns or you're using some of the built-in ones, you can scroll through those in kind of real time. You can kind of skip between them. Just gives you another way of being very expressive with it. So yeah, it's very cool. On an individual level, all of these sounds can be tweaked and they can be swapped out. You've got the 41 kits that you can cherry pick from. So if you select something like your kick drum here, I can open that up and I can choose different kick drums. They've also given you a hell of a lot of snare drums, which for me is really important because finding good crispy snares is really hard, and this thing is just littered with them, so I was very happy with that. You'll notice I can scroll down, there's a hell of a lot of snares. So you can swap between them, cherry pick, make your own kits, that can be saved, you can save those, you can save your beats as well. Before we dive too much into these other options, quickly just want to talk about as well this nice little function that you have these eye notifications here, these little icons. It means that the manual is kind of built into the app. So if I click on one of these, it dives further in, tells you exactly what you're modifying and what you're changing. I thought that was really cool. It's the same for the kit selection. And here you can see that you can customize your kit and you can save your kit and all of that kind of stuff. And also beat selection, it's the same thing, just gives you some good information about that. User beats, how you can save those. Drum details, exactly the same. You want to know what some of these parameters are that you're changing, you can dive in and take a look at that. So I thought that was really nice that you're not trying to load up a manual, have to find it elsewhere. For each drum sound, there are some options. There are some multi-outputs, I believe. I'm not super savvy with multi-outputs, but I believe you can do that from this application. In terms of the drum details, if you tweak a bunch of these parameters, let's say we added some reverb and width and we tweak all this stuff, if you need to reset them, you just hit the reset button and you can do that. We can tweak on an individual level, the volume, the tune, the panning, the reverb, the width, add some compression. We can tighten, so you can kind of tighten drum sounds up a little bit as well. Acts kind of like a gate. And then you've also got a nice little EQ here. So you've got your low frequencies, high frequencies, and the mid frequencies. You can adjust those on a broad range, or if you take that off on like a narrow range, which is handy as well, gives you a little bit more control. And one thing that is unique to the kick drum is that you can add this ducking, which is going to be like a sidechain effect. I'm not 100% sure at this point whether it's like a proper sidechain, because I don't think you can change the source. I think it just is for the kick. So I'm not sure if it's like a real sidechain or just like a side chaining effect. And I think it is adjusted via the noise dial. I still need to look into that a little bit more, but unique to the kick drum, you can do that. So you're going to be able to get a nice side chaining effect. That is the general user interface for the main screen. Let's have a look at the beat maker. How that works is that when you choose a pattern, you can go to beat selection here. And just like our kits, if we click on this, you'll notice you got all of your drum kits you can load up. If we click on the beat selection, we can load in a beat selection. So let's say we wanted something in the 70 BPM range, and flow motion sounds kind of cool. So I'm going to load that up. I only got this morning, so I'll barely listen to any of these. We load in a beat selection. That is linked to the beat maker, and what it does is it populates your beat maker or your step sequencer with all of these pre-made patterns. So you get a bunch of these that you can play with, and you can tweak these and change them and move them around. And you can also start completely blank and just put in your own steps and with your own sounds and all that kind of thing, and just build your own thing going on. So it gives you a few things at the top here. One that is interesting is that we have the MIDI function. So if I click on MIDI, let's say I was happy with this particular pattern that is laid out here, and I want to put that into my DAW, I can just drag the MIDI and drag it over and drop it into my track over there. So really handy stuff that you can do that. It's kind of just shifted things over a little bit there as we did that, doesn't matter. But that gives us a way to just take our preset patterns or patterns that we create, and we can drag that MIDI into our DAW. So nice and simple. What we can do here as well is we can change between the patterns that are given to us. So for each particular beat selection, there are usually 7 different patterns. I say 7 because the 8th one is usually blank. And I believe number 7 is usually a fill type pattern. So if we go back to the beginning, I'm just going to play these. One other thing to notice is that for every beat selection that you're given, there is a sort of ideal tempo or a recommended tempo of 74 BPM. My current project is on 61 BPM. So we're going to match that to 74. Let's put it on 74 because it is linked, of course, to the tempo of the project inside of Ableton. We can take a listen as it was, intended. And what I'll do is I'll just scroll through some of these presets so you can hear how the pattern changes as you go through. Really, really nice, and those sounds are so good. So yeah, you've got all your presets, and of course if you start with a blank sequencer, you can put in your own, and every time you change over, you can make a different pattern of your own and then export those out. You can actually also copy and paste between these patterns as well, which is really useful. So that is the basic functions of the step sequencer, and that is using the different beat selections that we have here. One thing you'll notice, if I change beat selection, so this one's called 74 flow motion. If I change this to this one, 74, what is that, Maracan? Not sure how you say that. Anyway, it changes the kit type to 23 tight byte. But don't be worried about that, because at first I thought, oh, so for every beat selection you have a particular kit. That's not the case. All it means is that it's just kind of like a recommended kit for that particular pattern. If I lock the kit using this locking icon, I can actually go back and I can change back to flow motion or any of these other particular drum patterns that we have here, and then we can play those. So if we go back to the beatmaker, the other thing I want to point out is how that is linked. This one is recommended at 79 BPM, but I'm not actually going to change the BPM of this project just now. I'm going to leave it at 74 and just play that. It sounds just fine. The reason for that is because it's using MIDI information. So although this is recommended at 79 BPM, I can make that whatever BPM I want. If I wanted to, speed that up to 113 BPM, I can do that, and we're not going to have too many problems. The same, of course, with slowing it all the way down. So we have all these pre-made patterns that we can use. We can create our own, and of course, we can customize and do all of that with the kit. So that's kind of it in a nutshell in terms of the basic functions. What I want to do now is I want to actually initialize the app just for giggles, and so that we can start with a completely blank slate and just take a little look at the beatmaker in closer detail. So this is it. It is a step sequencer. You can see that we've got 8 steps currently on every lane, if you will. So we have these lanes for our individual sounds. We've got our kicks, snares, and everything listed down the side. If you want to solo those, you can just click on them and, choose which one you want to solo. You can actually solo as well by double clicking on these little icons that light up with the red line underneath them. So let's say you're working on your kick drums. You want to come in here and add some reverb and stuff, but you want to do that while the pattern's playing. You don't want to hear anything else at the same time. You can just double click on that kick drum, listen to just that as you're tweaking it. Saves you having to bounce between the 2 pages too much. And there is a play button on both pages, whether you're on the home page or the beatmaker page, the play button is always there. So we've got 8 steps currently, nice and simple. If you've done any kind of step sequencing, this will be familiar to you, but let's look at the most basic functions. To draw in a note, we start with velocity generally for all of them. That is how you input the note. And the lower it is on this little kind of red bar that we're increasing and decreasing here, that's the lower the velocity and the higher. So in basic form, kind of the more punch, the louder the sound is, the higher up it will be. So let's say we put a couple of kick drums in. We've got 79 BPM. Let's set it to, I don't know, let's do 90 or thereabouts. 90 BPM will do us. Let's just do a very basic pattern so I can show you how some of this works, but I can just draw these notes in wherever I want them. So like this. Got our kick drums. Let's say I want to put a snare drum in, so we'll just put snares in kind of the usual places. Maybe make one a little louder than the other. That gives us our very basic functions. We can add some hi-hats in. We've got some little icons at the end here, which are useful. One at the top is the refresh. So if you want to clear everything, you can just hit that and get rid of everything. We also have this little arrow icon that's like a drop down. That lets us populate by sort of division. So you want to put 1/16 notes in, I can do that. You'll notice with the steps, 16 is the maximum amount of steps, all the way down to 1 step and everything in between, which is going to be really good for like creativity, playing around with different step timings and stuff like that. You're not going to be stuck to 4/4 patterns. You can mess around and just try out different things, see what you like. We can also randomize. So if we do the little random button at the bottom, we can just randomize the notes. You'll notice it's randomizing the sort of note point where it's been inputted into the step sequencer, and it's also varying the velocity as well, which is pretty nice. And again, we can clear those. I like that you can split between, so it doesn't have to be 16 on every step or 8 on every lane even. We can switch between, so we can have 16 steps here. And I don't know, if we wanted to simplify the snares down to like 4 steps or something, you could do that. You can just play around and yeah, see what works for you. So you got your steps, you can input those. We know how to draw those in now using the velocity. Let's put those back roughly, just a couple of kick drums, something to play around with. What other functions do we have available to us? The side where velocity is, we have a drop down. We have a few things that we can mess around with. Now, if we put some hi-hats in, let's take a look at swing because that's one of the options. So let's use the populate one. We can come here and just put them on every 16th note. You'll notice it puts a little variation in velocity as well, which is kind of nice. It's not going to be too static. We have it set up like this. If we go to the home page and we play this, we can now use our global effects here to change the swing of this drum pattern. So watch what happens as we play the drum pattern and I change the swing. The beauty of this, aside from the fact that it's really cool that we can just apply some swing, is that certainly inside of Ableton, you can use the drop down here, and where I can configure my automation, I can select that as a parameter. So I could now add this to my automation list. You see that it's here. So if I wanted to make like a MIDI loop, a drum loop of some kind, and I actually want the swing to fluctuate and change during that MIDI loop, I can do that, and I can automate that process doing that. So all of these things are, available for automation, which I think is really, really cool. I'm going to leave swing off, and the reason I was showing you swing is because when we come back here, I want to show you what is essentially manual swing, and that is here in the drop-down tab. It is actually called feel. I'm not sure why it's not just called swing here as well. I guess because it is slightly different, but this will allow us to move our notes. So sometimes you're working, especially when I do it with like my samplers, one thing I like to do is nudge notes, because that's how you're going to get more feel and more flexibility. So if we say with like our snare drums here, if I change it to feel, if I move them up like this, the snare drum is going to kick in quicker. It's going to be before the grid. And if I pull it down, it is going to be behind the grid. So we can try that. You can hear that being really lazy. So that's how you would move things around manually on the grid. You want to shift things, give it some rhythm, some life. You can do that. A couple of other basic things we have in here. We have spread, which is just panning. So you wanted to pan your snares to do different sides. You can do it like that. All of these same functions work exactly the same for whatever tab you're using here. So if I just want to clear those, I can clear that. It's not clearing everything. The velocity, the notes are still there. I'm just clearing out the spread that we changed there. If I go to tune, I can do the same thing. And actually, maybe tune would be better demonstrated with something like the hi-hats. If we go to our hi-hats here and we change the tune, it does exactly as you would suggest. We can pitch the samples up and down. So let's just do a weird wavy pattern. You get that kind of effect. We'll clear that off, change it back. So those are the basic functions. If you want to dive a little further, we also have some more options as well. And keep in mind that you're, now building your custom kit. So let's say this was drum pattern number 1. I could copy this and paste it onto here, and you do that using the little settings icon here. We can copy measure, and we can paste the measure. I could make a duplicate over onto 2, or I could just start again on 2 and put in, I don't know, some completely other different drum pattern. It'll sound like garbage, but you get the idea. We can start building presets that we can ship out later on. So really cool. To dive a little bit further into the step sequencing, what happens when you want to do divisions? Because at the moment, even if we have 16 steps, that doesn't give us that much control. It gives us a certain amount. We've got 16 notes that we can play around with. We want to go further. We want to dive further into that. What you can use is where the little number 1 is above here on this top row. We can actually split each step into 4 divisions. So for every step, we can split that into 4. And I could put 4 notes in here. So we'll get this little quadruple effect at the beginning. And for every lane, we can do this. And it's also not just limited to velocity. Even if I want to change the feel of those 4 individual notes, I can do that. So I can make them lazy. I can make them before the grid or after. You can do all of that. Same with spread and tuning. So you've got loads and loads of options here. Loads of things that can really make your beats kind of more interesting. I'm going to clear that off for a second. I'm going to go back to velocity and just set that back to 1 note. So for every single step, there are 4 subdivisions. You can split that thing up and go a little bit further. The other thing you can do with something like your snare drums here, our hi-hats and the toms, as you can see, what you'll notice is that those particular sounds have these little circle dot icons underneath them. It's not on the kick drums, and it's not on something like the perks and things down here. It's only certain sounds have this, and that is the variations. So when you're back inside of the kit, we go here. Most of the kits, in fact, I'm pretty sure all of the kits, if I click my kick drum here, we just kind of manually listen to this again. Got a kick drum. We have a snare drum. Well, actually next to it on the keyboard, there's also a separate snare drum. So we've got 2 snares that we can pick from. We also have the side stick. And we have the roll. So when you're dealing with your snares, you're dealing with a group of snares. You're not just dealing with one. And when you change them inside of here, let's say you wanted to customize this particular kit and I want to swap this out for something else. I don't know, let's say this T and K was the snare that I wanted. Switch the snare drum out. It switches all of those inside of that group. So both individual hits, the roll, and the side stick. That's important when you look at the beat maker because that's how you change things here. Because they're kind of grouped together, that's how we apply them to these certain steps. So let's say we want to put the roll in there. How do you do that? You do it by clicking this little circle icon, and I can swap out a single snare drum to a roll. So we can do that. Which I think is really cool. One other thing quickly as well with the rolls, the thing that I love about that, because this it's kind of, I've only really seen it on this particular plugin. I don't know whether it exists on other ones, but what I love about it is that it is actually pitching those rolls in time with the tempo. So if I speed this drum break all the way up, I don't know, let's just make it 125 BPM. It still fits. If we slow the drum break way, way down, let's make it like 50 something BPM. It's great. It's essentially kind of like time stretching that roll. So it always works no matter what your BPM is, your tempo. You buy sample packs, sometimes you get these fills, these drum rolls that are kind of, available to you. You then have to try and work it out and see if you can time stretch it to fit the BPM of whatever you're working on. So much easier inside of this particular plugin just to put the drum rolls in wherever you want them, and it's always going to sound really good. So we've got the option to do rolls. We can also swap for our side stick. And of course I can add more steps in, and let's say I wanted a little roll to be happening here. You get the idea. Just going to put the tempo of this drum loop back up a little bit as well. Let's just put it back up to 90 something. So we can do it here. I'm not going to do it for every single one of these, but bear in mind you can do it for like your toms. You're going to get some variation. And another cool one is like the hi-hats, because they have plenty of variation as well. You have your single dot, so your standard tight hi-hat. Let's put a half open in there. What have we got here? We've got open and then a stomp. So I'm wondering, is that, if we do the open and then the stomp straight after, does that close it? Let's see. So if we actually take that out, will that play through? Yeah, really cool. So that's how you can get more realistic sounds as well, where you got your closed and open hi-hats, and you can manipulate those in time with the break. So all in all, a very capable and very cool plugin. The final thing I want to do is I just want to talk quickly about the effects and the sort of sound design that we can do. So let's just set this on. Let's make it a little bit slower. I like slow drum breaks. Let's make it like 80 BPM. I'll probably just leave it as it is. Actually, I'm going to switch this back out to the single snare. I'm going to make this one a little bit louder, and I'm going to make my roll a little bit louder as well. Open hi-hat and stuff's not quite right, but you get the idea. It'll do. If we go to the home page, we can now play with our sound design and just see what happens. So the basic set of functions here, we have these rotary knobs. We are currently using everything dry. We initialize the application, so we're not really applying any effects at the moment. We can start to build that up. There's a couple of things that I want to talk about. The first one is the fact that you have this noise here. So noise, you've got cassette noise, room tone, and vinyl. One thing that was in the walkthrough, and I only briefly went through the walkthrough, I didn't watch the whole thing, but it is affected by the playback inside of the DAW. So if I play my drum roll now, or my drum loop, you'll notice I cranked up the noise there and nothing actually happened. And that's because you need to have play enabled inside of your DAW. If that is enabled, you will hear the noise already. So there you can hear that, hopefully, the cassette hiss. Which is really nice, sounds great. I can dial that in. One other thing was that I made the assumption that you were choosing. So you're choosing cassette or room tone or vinyl. You're not, you're actually just applying as many of those as you want. So I can add a little bit of noise, like cassette noise. If I switch to room tone, I can then dial that in on top of it. And the same with the vinyl. But just keep in mind, you will only hear them if the play button is enabled inside of the DAW. So we can add those effects to it. It's going to be quite nice to have some like room noise and some, vinyl texture and stuff. We can do that. We can apply some swing. So maybe let's apply a little bit more swing to our drum loop. And you can choose your swing options. You can use, 1/4 notes. Currently swinging with 1/16 notes, but you've got some options there as well. We can apply some reverb. There are a bunch of different reverb types, and these are really nice sounding reverbs as well. We're just going to keep it with the spring reverb, but just know that there are others that if you want to play with those. Let's dial in a little spring reverb. Ooh. I'm a big fan of like old 60s like reverb drum breaks and stuff, and that sounds really nice already. We've also got some effects, different types of effects that you can use. We've got chorus, flanger, phaser, saturation. Now, one thing I haven't tried, I noticed before that actually when I was first initially playing with this, I'm wondering whether these effects stack exactly the same as well. Let's add a little chorus. I'm just going to see, I want to know if these effects stack the same that the noise does. That's something that I'm not sure, so we'll do that in real time. Let's find out. Yeah, sounds so good. It looks like that is what's happening. It looks like you are stacking those effects as well. So you can apply a bunch of different effects there. Decade, and this is a guess, but I'm assuming the higher you dial this thing in, let me just stop the vinyl noise. The higher you dial this in, kind of the cleaner the sound, like the kind of later on. And going to the left-hand side of the dial, grungier and maybe like a little bit earlier in terms of the time. That is a bit of a guess, but let's try it and see what happens. Yeah, I would say that was about right. Really good. Final one is distressing. Let's try that. That just sounds so nice. So good. I love gritty, proper gritty drum breaks, and that sounds fantastic. So the final thing here, let's just stop the vinyl noise again, is that we can manipulate some effects as well in real time. So on the left-hand side, using our pitch wheel on our MIDI controller, we can stretch. So there's like a time stretching, focus, chaos, and filter. It seems to me that you can turn all of these on at exactly the same time as well. So they are sort of stackable as well. We'll try a couple. I don't want to go through everything, but let's just see what a couple of these things sound like while the drum loop's playing. That stretch actually sounded really good. Focus is an interesting one. I saw this in the demo. So focus will allow you to drop elements out. It's very, very clever. As I dial this, let's just start it dialed all the way to the left. It's just going to be the kick drum. And as I release this, it's going to allow more of the sounds to come in, and you can tweak that as you push it through. And it's a way of creating space and moments in that kind of drum pattern, just using the focus here. It's very clever. You get the idea. It's kind of isolating those sounds. Very cool. Keep in mind that you can, we could time stretch this and do focus at the same time. We're just going to do the individual sounds for now so it doesn't get too crazy. Let's see what chaos sounds like. Okay, so it's kind of like a bit of a stuttering sort of effect. That's pretty cool. Kind of playing around with the pitch, I guess. And then filter, which I'm assuming is pretty traditional, like low pass, high pass filters maybe. Yeah, I still can't get over how good the sounds are in this thing. So we've got that set up. We know that we can mess around with those on the pitch wheel. The mod wheel also has some changes, so we can change our velocity, feel, spread, and tune, which are all the same things that were inside of here on our drop-down tabs. So of course, velocity is the velocity of the notes. We can mess around with the feel, which is going to play with the swing of things and moving notes around. Spread is going to mess with the panning, and tune, of course, is going to tune. So let's just see what happens with that in real time using the mod wheel. So velocity, as you imagined, was bringing those notes up and down a little bit, and feel, the harder we push that, the more it's shifting those notes off the grid. So it starts to kind of stumble on itself a little bit. Really cool, because as I said, all of this is, you can automate all of this. Could just give some real life to your drum breaks, make them really, really good. Spread, let's just listen to this. It should be panning, I'm assuming, panning from left to right. Strange thing was I couldn't really hear that doing anything there. Let's just make sure play is on the DAW in case it's connected. Okay, I've got to be honest, I'm not really feeling much difference there in terms of spread. I was expecting to hear the drums sort of bouncing around left to right, but I couldn't really see that happening. I'll look into that and come back to you at some other point. If you know, leave it in the comments what I'm doing wrong there, but that one I couldn't really seem to get. Let's try tuning, which should be pitching the samples it's playing. And again, it doesn't seem to be working. I'm just going to try with the play button enabled. Yeah, a little bit strange, not really seeing much happening there. I kind of assumed it was going to be messing with the pitch of the samples. I don't know if it has to be connected to something that's happening in here, whether you need to... Let's try it with the hi-hats. Let's try tune, and let's mess with the tuning here and see if it changes. I don't know if it's supposed to be linked. These are interesting things to know, and if not, I will contact the developers and ask them if they can explain that to me, because I'm not sure why I'm not getting anything there. Let's see what happens. We're using the mod wheel, tune. I had the play button on. Okay, So it seems that it is connected. Maybe we've answered that question for ourselves. It seems like if you want that to change the tuning, you need to enable some kind of tuning variation inside of the beatmaker first, and then you can do that. I suppose we can test that by changing the spread as well and see if we manipulate the spread, whether we now get some stereo panning. So you need to have something set. In fact, let's just see if it just needs one note set. So we're putting this on the hi-hats. Let's go back. Change it to spread, see what happens. Do I need the play button on? Yeah, that still doesn't seem to be working for me. I'm not 100% sure what's happening there. Does that do like a reset as well when you turn that off and on? Anyway, I'll come back to that. But you can see the huge potential for this particular plugin. There was one other thing that I hadn't noticed, and it was something I noticed early on. I just want to quickly check it now while I'm here. Yeah, okay. It seemed to have a little thing where I changed some kind of setting before. And when I was selecting my certain sounds, I noticed that if I went to the kick drum, and you can see it highlights the kick drum, and then I go to the snare, it's working now. Maybe it was just one random bug that I picked up on. Even when I was selecting a different sound, the little red icon stopped moving. The only reason I point these things out, not is because, you know, I'm trying to be critical of this plugin, because I absolutely love it, but because it's a new plugin, I think it's really important to be able to give feedback to the developers, and I do want to send them a message. Just tell them what I think about it, because I think this is an absolutely incredible plugin. The sound of those drums and everything else is really good. But while I'm there, if there's anything that I've noticed, I will pick up on that. Mainly these two, there was something, it seemed like I could get the tuning to work. Spread, I couldn't quite understand. Maybe it's just me and I need to go back and look at the walkthrough as well. I'll do that, just make sure. Anyway, I think that's pretty much it. The one other thing that I would say in terms of a feedback is just that when you're inside of the beatmaker here, when you input your notes, you'll notice that they have this darker background. So there's a slightly different contrast to obviously the step. So whenever you've inputted a note, the background of that goes dark, which means that when you change from velocity, velocity is easy to see because you have these red bars. If I switch over to feel, I know that there are notes on those steps because the background is going a little bit darker. The only issue I have with that is that it actually changes quite a lot depending on the angle of my monitor. And when I'm in the studio recording like this with the lights all dim and everything, it's like kind of really ideal with the contrast. I wonder for somebody with maybe eyesight issues, whether they would be able to see that, or if you're on a laptop in a sunny day and you're sitting outside, it might have been more useful if rather than it just being a slightly darker color of the step, it was something different. So like you could see like maybe when you're in feel, these light up like blue where there are steps inputted, because this can still be red. You can still keep that as you're changing it. It would just make it a little bit easier to see. I do think on a sunny day on a laptop, I would struggle to see the contrast between those. Just one small thing to notice. Again, it's not a criticism. It's just a suggestion, and I will message the developers and say that. Anyway, I think I'm going to sign off there on this particular episode. It's been long enough. I think this is an absolutely phenomenal drum plugin. The kits, the crispiness of it, the amount of sound design that we can do, particularly with the automation, because sometimes you just make a drum loop. It can just feel so static and so boring, and I spoke about that in my last video. That's why I was looking at Sector to try and bring life into it. And it kind of, this thing just popped up at just exactly the right time. It's a fantastic plugin for that. You've got all this flexibility inside of the step sequencer to create interesting and unusual breaks. And then with the automation and all of these effects, we can just go that one step further and just make the drum breaks have so much like life into them. Not to mention those kits really do sound super crispy, super nice. Anyway, I've said enough about this one. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Any comments, questions, let me know, and I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Take care.